Hi, my name is Mina. Welcome to Kids Talk Church History, a one-of-a-kind podcast where kids investigate the history of the church. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Has he kept his promise? How has Jesus built and preserved his church against all odds? Come with us on a trip through history to find the answer, here on Kids Talk Church History.
After learning about the early church and the medieval church, we have just concluded 14 episodes on the Reformation. There is so much more to say, so we probably will return to it. As usual, we got most of our hosts together. I'll ask everyone some questions, and listeners, you can participate too by sending us an email with your answers to some of the questions we'll discuss today. As you know, everyone who writes in will be entered in a drawing for a book, and we might read some of your answers during our next episodes. Now, before we get started, we need to introduce a special guest who has listened to the podcast and entered and won the Be Our Guest drawing. Welcome to the show, Isaac.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We have a few questions. We just want to ask you to get to know you a little bit. Is that all right with you?
Yes.
Okay. How old are you, Isaac?
I'm 10 years old.
Okay, great. Where do you live?
I live in Amelia, Virginia.
Awesome. So how did you start listening to our podcast?
I started by listening from my teacher, Miss Bridget, and she teaches our church history class.
That's great. What about church history do you like? What are some of the favorite things you've been learning about?
My favorite thing is probably about how all the reformers know God and how they always work together and when they always preach the gospel and they just come out winning.
I love that. I think we could all agree here that that is one of the most important things that we've learned about when we've talked about the Reformation. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Isaac.
No problem.
I'm going to open it up to the rest of the hosts and go through some questions. And then, Isaac, I'd also love for you to chime in if you have anything that you'd like to share. So the first question I'd like to talk about is, what has been everyone's favorite episode from our exploration of the Reformation and why? Who wants to get us started?
I will. My favorite one was John Knox and the Reformation. My favorite part was when what surprised me first is that if the galley was on fire or sinking, that the French would just leave the slaves to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a very, very interesting life. I enjoyed that one too.
I have to agree with Isaac. That was one of my favorite episodes that we've done for the Reformation, at least. Mainly because I've actually been to Scotland, so I got to see some of the places where John Knox was and where he preached and stuff. And so it just added a little bit more context of of the places I was visiting. So that was very helpful.
Okay, yeah, I agree with Trinity and Isaac. I think he had one of the more interesting lives of the reformers we've learned about. Anyone else have a favorite episode?
My favorite episode, reformer, just all of the things. My favorite absolutely was John Lasky, he was Polish. And one thing that I loved about that episode is a person I'd never heard of before, really out of left field for me, but just the important impact that he had on the Reformation as a whole. Like, he contributed significantly to the Heidelberg Catechism, which is just a joy to read, and absolutely wonderful. Like, the whole theme of comfort in the Heidelberg Catechism came from John Lasky. And then also, like, the Presbyterian system significantly contributed to that, and especially to the Scots Presbyterian church ecclesiology. And he was so cool. 10 out of 10 would recommend that episode. Everyone, listen to this one first and then go listen to that one because it's the best one. Period. I love it.
Thank you, Emma. That's really good. Well, I agree with you. I think it's the what we would consider the no-name reformers that really impacted the church in really big ways. And I think the Heidelberg Catechism is extremely important. So thank you for mentioning that. All right. Does anyone else have an episode they'd like to mention?
Hey, I would. So I'm Grace, and I think my favorite episode was the episode on Tyndale. I don't know, I just really liked it. It was really interesting.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think I'm Christian, and I think my favorite episode was probably, I would say, Martin Luther, mainly probably because I've heard a lot about Martin Luther, and that's kind of where the spotlight tends to shine to whenever you read church history books. But I think that he had a really fascinating life, and how a lot of things just came together to where he could keep spreading the gospel.
I agree wholeheartedly. What about Linus? Did you have? Yeah.
Oh, I'm Linus, and my favorite episode was the one about Tyndale too, because I really enjoyed the guest on that one.
Yeah, we've had some really great guests this season. I think if anything, what they've done for us is they've dispelled some of the myths we have around these reformers. All right. The next question. What was your favorite reformer that we have met? We've kind of answered this in our last one, but maybe we could rephrase it, kind of what we ask our guests. If you could meet one of the reformers, who would you want to meet, or who's your favorite? Isaac, let's start with you.
My favorite would be John Knox.
That's great. Why would you say that?
Probably because he is a great reformer. I also wrote a book report on him, and also because he was the one who stayed and helped fight against Queen Mary.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I love that you wrote a book report about him. That's
Thank
wonderful. Great job. Okay, any of the other hosts?
Going back to your first question, where you kind of phrased it as we phrase it to our guests,
Mhm.
I would love to meet Jeanne d'Albert, because she just led such an interesting life, and she was very staunch in her view of the gospel, and she helped people in France, or the area where she lived during that time. She was very inspiring. I would just love to meet her and see what more she had to say.
So John Lasky again, but also for variety's sake, Cyril Lucaris was he was an Orthodox bishop in Constantinople who was highly influenced by the ideas of the Reformation. And one thing that I really appreciated about our time spent in the Reformation is just seeing all the different people from different walks of life and different like theological backgrounds. Obviously, like there was kind of most of them were like Catholic, but then you had specifics of each country had like their own flavor. And I thought it was really interesting. I'd never heard of any sort of Reformation in the Orthodox Church. And so I really enjoyed learning about Cyril Lucaris, and I think meeting him would be really cool, and just kind of getting his perspective on Protestantism, specifically with the Orthodox background. I just think that would be really interesting, a really interesting conversation to meet and talk with him.
Yes. I like what you keep saying about how we have so many different churches in these Reformation stories, but we'll talk about this later, some of the lessons we can take away from the Reformation. But Isaac, you also said this, their adherence and their love of the gospel, and how that became one of the most important leading forces in their life.
Yeah, that's kind of the uniting factor.
Right, that it should be, at least, right? Okay, anybody else?
I think I would really love to meet John Lasky. I know Emma already said how she really liked that episode, but I think he was just really interesting, and I would like to meet him.
Yeah, that's great. I would have to agree with Isaac and say John Knox, because I think out of all the reformers we learned about, he had one of the most interesting backgrounds. And like Martin Luther, who also had an interesting background, just when we talked about him being a tutor, then a bodyguard, then a slave, just an incredible journey. So I think he'd be really fun to talk to and hear how his faith was impacted by those different things that happened in his life.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably gonna be like Lucas in this episode, like last episode, how he just kept talking about Martin Luther, because I really like him, especially I think how most church history books that I have read, or Reformation's era books, it mostly centered upon Martin Luther, and especially since he had such a background of turning into a monk, and then he started learning more, and he just saw the law, and then he realized the true gospel of what Christianity actually is. And I think that's one of the reasons why I would say that Martin Luther is one of my favorite reformers.
As Emma said, gospel should be the uniting factor. I couldn't agree more.
Linus, you have anything to add?
Not on this one.
All right. Is there anything that has surprised you from what we've learned about the Reformation? Because I know when we learn about it sometimes through different books or different types of media, we can sometimes take away these myths from it. So is there anything that has surprised you to learn? Isaac, if you want to jump in, just jump in anytime, okay?
Okay, the thing that surprised me is that when John Knox was teaching his apprentices about sword fighting, I was surprised that their father wasn't there watching them over them, but after I read a book on him, I knew that their father was away for a little bit, and I knew that he trusted John Knox to keep his boys safe.
Wow, that's very interesting. I was surprised by that. Now, I don't think I knew that. So thank you for teaching me about that, Isaac.
No problem.
All right. I'll also open it up to the rest of the hosts now. What is something that surprised you?
I think one story that really surprised me was from the episode on Tyndale. And there was this mother, and she and her 6 kids got burned at the stake because she taught them the Lord's Prayer, right, and the 10 Commandments in English. So that surprised me.
And going on that, it surprised me how much we take for granted Bible translations and how we have them in our own languages and stuff, that it's more accessible, when back then they were pioneering the translations of the Gospels and the Bible in general. And that surprised me. Like, we take it so much for granted that we forget about how it even came to be.
Right.
I was surprised. Oh, sorry. Go
You're
ahead.
good. No, go ahead.
Oh,
Emily.
okay. Well, I was just going to say, I was surprised that the Spanish Reformation existed, because I did not know that there was a Reformation in Spain. Turns out there was. That was just really, there's so many things in this period of, like, random people that we don't, like, we kind of hear about the big names. There's Luther, and there's Calvin, and there's, like, Germany and England and whatever, and these kind of, like, the popular Reformation stories. But there was so much of, like, these, like, random people, random reformers, random countries that aren't, like, popular to talk about, but actually had a significant impact on church history and had their own, like, really rich stories from this time. And, like, there were so many like that, like Cyril Lucarius or John Lasky or the Spanish Reformation or whatever, that, these kind of lesser known stories that I really enjoyed learning about. It kind of surprised me that they existed.
And I think piggybacking on Emma's point, one of the things that really surprised me was kind of how widespread all the Reformations were, or how many they were. Because mainly when you read church history books, or when you talk about Reformation, you're talking about Germany, France, Calvin, and Luther. But then you don't really talk about any of the lesser known countries. And I think that that's something, and I think maybe it would contribute to the point that there was really no growth in those countries of Protestantism, and it mainly stayed Catholic. But I think that that really surprised me how many Reformations there actually were.
Yeah, speaking of how many Reformations there were, I was surprised to learn there was a Reformation in Italy. And I mean, it was squashed down pretty quickly, but just learning that there was people were recognizing the importance of what the Reformations were doing and how they could try to incorporate it in the capital of the Universal Church. So I had no idea about that. So I was fascinated by that episode.
Speaking of that, kind of jumping off of that, another thing that I found really interesting is how, like, both how separate and also how interconnected they all are. Because, like, in the episode on John Lasky, our guest talked about how it was some of the reformers and heretics from Italy that were kicked out during the Italian Reformation that went over to Poland. And there's so much interconnectedness, and, like, Cyril Lucarius, he hung out with the people in Geneva, and, like, there's so much overlap between a lot of these things, and it's not very much like the Reformation in Germany, the Reformation in France. It was really like the Reformation of the whole church, and the church is really one large body, and there's a lot of interconnectedness between all of the people that we talked about and all of the episodes that we did. So that I found really cool as well.
There's such a persistence among all the reformers that really shows that this Reformation was of God. There was a way for this to happen, and it was not just people sporadically making these decisions. It's really a group effort, which I didn't think about that before. So I agree with you.
And so many of them were like friends.
Right.
Just
right.
Crazy.
Yeah. What about you, Linus? Anything surprise you?
Well, just that only the rich and privileged could read the Bible, whereas today, like, everyone can read it and it's everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Let's go on to our last question. What do you think we can learn from the Reformation, or from the Reformers more specifically? Isaac, do you have anything you think we can learn?
Yes, I think that we can learn that we can trust God, and that His word is truthful, and that we can know His word by reading it and meditating on it.
That's very important. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would all agree.
Yeah.
Just shared the most ultimate truth with us.
Yeah. To go off of what Isaac was saying is in a lot of the episodes, guests specifically mentioned that the Protestant reformers and the Protestant church in various areas, it was a big goal of theirs to educate the people, because it's Protestantism really only makes sense if you've like read the Bible. It doesn't like it's a lot harder than Catholicism in a lot of ways without the actual like reading the words of Scripture. And so a lot of the reformers really emphasized Christian education as a vital part of evangelism. And as I think it was Trinity, he was mentioning like Bible translation, and how that really was like educating the common people and allowing them to read the Bible in their own vernacular, and like how important that is. Like it is really, really important for Christians to be able to connect with God in their own language. And God isn't not like bound by Greek or something. He's not like, I can only talk to you if you speak Latin. Like that's not how it works. And I think that's really important to remember how important it is. And so we can take that and then work because there are still so many languages that don't have the Bible. And so we can be inspired by the people who really understood how important it was, and not get, complacent, like Trinity was talking about with, oh, well, I have the Bible in English, so we can stop there. It's like, no, we ought to continue to seek to spread the gospel in every language, not just, whatever the popular one is.
Right. And to not do what we could do what the reformers did. They didn't take their position for granted. And it could have been safe where they were. A lot of them sacrificed a lot to further the Protestantism and the Reformation. So I think we can kind of take a cue from them to not take it for granted and to focus on sharing the gospel, which will in the end be the uniting factor for everything. So I think that's all very important.
Yeah, and Isaac said that all of the reformers had trust in God, and a lot of them were martyrs. So I think we should really learn from them and just learn that we should always have trust in God no matter the circumstances.
Also, maybe we should put aside some of our differences to help spread the gospel in parts of the world that aren't being preached to or even being evangelized to. There are certain aspects of Christianity which, sure, there are different types of doctrine regarding some aspects, but ultimately we should spread the word of God and the gospel. That should be the main focus of evangelism.
Yes. There can be different views of different doctrines, but when it comes down to the gospel, we can't have divided views on that, because I keep saying it like a broken record, but uniting factor. So,
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think one thing for me is like we shouldn't just think that because our church has been like going on for not to say anything bad about tradition, but what I'm trying to say is that we should always keep reading the scriptures and try to find what they actually mean. For example, Martin Luther, he wasn't just content with I believe 1400 years, but he actually wanted to read the Bible and see what it said. And that kind of goes back to the Christian education part, that when you have more and more people reading the Bible, then it can be very useful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And also with that, a lot of the reformers were actually going back to the early church. So with church history is also part of that, of going back to, the original creeds, how, and being able to interpret the scripture, not just like through whatever we feel like, because that isn't any better than being like, well, the church has said it for 500 years. But being able to go to the scripture and interpret it well in the context of the stuff that we know to be true, So,
Like I said, being like the reformers, they as somewhat educated people were able to go back to these original things and interpret them for the population at large. I think we could do that in small roles as students and as Christians in our daily lives now. So it's very important. Thank you. As we close out with the questions, Isaac, is there anything you would like to add or say about things you've learned, anything you found interesting? It's all right if you don't, but if there's anything else.
That's fine. I do have one thing to add.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys were doing John Knox's, you talked about when he was in the gallows.
Mm-hmm.
In the book I was reading, it said that they tried to make the slaves bow down and worship to a graven image, which was Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So, and after that, John Knox did something that really surprised me. Instead of just burning the idol, he threw it into the ocean, and he said, "Let the lady swim." And then later on that night, one of his friends had overheard the captain talking, and his friend told him that the captain had said, "Let them live their godless life." And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Wow, Isaac, I love how
Wow.
much you know about John Knox.
It's amazing.
Yeah. You keep teaching me things I didn't know.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all these fun facts.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate how much you know. It's so great to meet other kids who love church history. So before we go, we sadly have to say goodbye to one of our hosts, Lucy, who turned 18 and is technically no longer a kid.
We have to kick her off.
She's very busy preparing for college and working part-time. So Lucy, could you tell us a little bit about your plans or what you plan on doing?
Yeah, of course. So I graduated. I was homeschooled, so I had a bit of an early graduation. I graduated on May the 4th, so I've been out of school for a few weeks, but I'm working a lot, saving up money, even though I'm going to community college, which is free here in California. But saving up money for when I graduate. I'm planning to go to college for 2 years. I'm going to get a degree, associate's degree in forensic technology. And then hopefully after that, I'll be able to go into the field of fingerprint identification. Yeah, that's the plan.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I know a few of us have something we'd like to share with you. I'll start, and then I know Trinity, you have something you'd like to say. So just what I want to say is that I've only been a part of Kids Talk Church History for, I don't know how long, but not a very long time. And Lucy, it's been a pleasure to get to work with you and get to know you, even in the short time I've been here. You've shown such a dedication to your role as a moderator and just the love you've shown for church history. I'm thankful that I've worked with you, and you've always been a kind and caring co-host. So thank you, and we're going to miss you, but I hope you all the best in your future. So Trinity, would you like to add anything?
Of course. Lucy, we grew up together in the same church in California, and so it's been a pleasure knowing you and even working in this or doing this podcast with you. It's been such fun. And you sharing your knowledge about podcasting and even giving sometimes insightful answers to questions. It's been great to work with you in the short amount of time that we've had together, and we're going to miss you. So I wish you the best in college and in the life that God has in store for you in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could just add something at the end, I'm really glad I got to have this experience with you. I remember when we started this podcast, I was a little hesitant because I wasn't that interested in church history, but I'm really glad that I've done it because I got to, meet all of you, and for those of you I already knew, get closer with you. And it's just been a great opportunity to just learn more. I need to be like expanding my horizons more. So I'll try to continue to listen to this, even though I won't be a part of it anymore. But thanks to all of you, and I also wish you the best.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for it.
Cutting in. I didn't prepare anything, but I'm feeling very inspired to share. So before I joined the podcast, my mom was like, "Hey, Emma, there's this cool podcast. Do you want to join it?" So the first episode that I ever listened to, Lucy was the host, and she did so great. And I was like, whoa, this is a cool thing. I should totally be a part of it. So it's because of you, Lucy, that I joined the podcast. And you've been really cool, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little better and work with you on the podcast. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your whole existence.
You've left behind a legacy for us to follow in all your
Big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill.
So true.
Okay, so I'll close it out. We have learned so much, and we have more to learn. We might come back to the time of the Reformation later on. In the next episodes, however, we'll move on to the 17th century. Make sure you stay tuned, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast and tell your friends about it. Also, visit our website, kidstalkchurchhistory.org, where you'll find all our podcast special offers, news, and more. And just by leaving a comment or asking a question, you will have the opportunity to win a copy of Simonetta Carr's book, Church History. We're looking forward to hearing from you. In the partnership with the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, and on behalf of my co-host, I am Sophia. Thank you for listening to Kids Talk Church History. And also, before we close it out, I did this out of order. I'd like to say thank you to our special guest today, Isaac. You have been such a joy to have on the podcast, and I think I can speak for everyone when I say we've loved learning from you and all your fun knowledge about John Knox. So thank you, Isaac.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. It was so
This
fun.
was so fun, guys.